Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hebrew Seminary's 2021 Spirituality Series, Jewish Mysticism, Making It Real for Your Life. Hebrew Seminary has created a new series of webinars led by our esteemed faculty, which are designed to explore the enduring wisdom of Jewish mysticism and Judaism, and offer pathways to help us navigate our world. And boy, do we need help with that, and the challenges we face, both as individuals and collectively. Since our founding in 1992 in Skokie, Illinois, Hebrew Seminary has been an inclusive and egalitarian community, teaching our students to become rabbis as well as Jewish educators and to serve all Jewish communities, including, and very importantly, the deaf community. We offer a scholarly education that empowers our students to become leaders as well as spiritual guides and provide learning opportunities for all communities. We want to give special recognition and gratitude to our extraordinary founder and president, Rabbi Dr. Douglas Goldhammer. For those of you who are familiar with the seminary, we thank you for being here and for being part of our community. And for those of you who are new to the Hebrew Seminary, we are so grateful that you're here and for the virtual opportunities brought to us to reach an audience beyond the walls of the seminary in Skokie during these extraordinary times. I'm Nancy Rothstein, a member of the board of Hebrew Seminary, and I'll be moderating tonight's third of our series. And tonight it is exploring the mystical teachings of Rabbi Abraham Maimonides with Rabbi Daniel Vaisrub, and we'll get to that in a moment. But before I introduce the rabbi, I want to give a few Zoom guidelines to enrich your experience tonight. First, the chat room is at the bottom of your screen and it's open for your comments. But please put your questions in the Q&A feature also at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be getting to those after Rabbi's fascinating presentation, unless God comes down and illuminates and has something to say in the middle of a question for you.
In which case we should all be worried.
Right. To ensure that we can hear Rabbi Vaisrub, I will tell you, you are all muted. And I want to introduce our ASL interpreter, Kathy Silvern, who will be signing this evening. And thank you, Kathy. It is an art form to watch her. It's just gorgeous. For those following Kathy, please feel free to use the gallery view rather than the speaker view, which you can find in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And in addition, you may choose to do what's called pin Kathy's video to enlarge it by clicking on the three dots at the top right corner of her image and select pin video. And you can also do this for the speaker as well. Now, let me please introduce our gifted speaker. Rabbi Vaisrub, yeah, don't laugh, it's true. He's very modest. A BA from the University of Michigan, an MA from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and an MBA from McGill University. He was ordained by Chief Rabbi Israel Meir Lau in 2012. When not studying and teaching Talmud at Hebrew Seminary, we are most fortunate, he helps run a technology strategy consultancy. This evening, he'll be speaking about, I'll repeat it, exploring the mystical teachings of Rabbi Abraham Maimonides. Now, as the moderator of this Hebrew Seminary Spirituality Series, I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to hear gleanings in preparation for each event with our esteemed speakers, and so with Rabbi Vaisrub. When you realize that the Rabbi and Dr. Abraham Maimonides, by the way, I didn't know this at first, the son of Moses Maimonides, AKA the Rambam, Abraham Maimonides was 18 when his father died and was appointed the head of the Jewish nation and the court physician. Well, hearing what Rabbi Vaisrub is going to share about this extraordinary luminary is a testament to how remarkable he was. I was particularly entranced by Rabbi Maimonides' teachings of how to, quote, and this is quote Rabbi Vaisrub, prepare yourself for the fullness of the human experience and quote, to make space for God. And with that, I welcome you, Rabbi Vaisrub.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And particularly, I want to thank the board, Nancy, Tom, Sherry, Kathy. I've had her interpret me before, and it's kind of terrifying, especially when she imitates my facial expressions, my movements. And so we're in for a fun evening tonight. So at my wife's behest, I actually wrote notes for this, very much out of character. And I was told I have 1 hour to speak. So of course I have about 3 hours worth of material. We'll try to cram it in. I'm going to go quick during question period, please, and throw questions because there are going to be questions. Not the least of which is the most essential of his writings, the how to experience direct contact, as it were, with the divine, is part of his works that have been lost to history. So we have gleanings from it, and from it we can still get a huge amount of worthwhile material. So let's dive right into it. So Rabbeinu Abraham ben Harambam, aka Ibrahim ibn Musa al-Maimoni al-Sufi, better known as Abraham Maimonides, born and lived in Al-Fustat, which is in modern-day Old Cairo in Egypt. He was very much his father's child. In fact, he learned most, if not all, of his Torah from his father, received his medical education from his father. And so when his father died fighting the plague, fighting a pandemic in Cairo at 65, he took over his dad's work. Namely, he was appointed the Nagid, or the Rais al-Ummah, the head of the nation, the Jewish community of Egypt, and arguably head of the Jewish community of the world at the time. And he was the court physician to the Ayyubid Caliphate for the descendants of Saladin, who'd originally hired his father. So he wrote three primary works. The first is called Milhamot Adonai, the Wars of the Lord, which is addressed to the sages of Provence in southern France in 1235. He wrote a short treatise called The Discourse on the Sayings of the Sages, which I have particular affection for because my wife and I read it together as part of our courting. It was first published in the introduction to Yaqub ibn Habib's Ein Yaakov, a pretty famous Talmudic compilation. And then arguably his most famous work, the Kitab Kifaya al-Abidin, which is the guide for the servants of God. He also wrote a commentary to the Torah, again, only of which Genesis and Exodus are extant. And he wrote numerous responsa to Jewish communities ranging from France and Spain to Yemen, which very much followed in his father's footsteps. So, speaking of his father's footsteps, his father had written at the end of the guide that when you've learned the secrets of the Torah, now what do you do? And he made two suggestions. The first was that you engage in politics, in other words, engage with people, and mysticism, in other words, engage with God. So the problem for Maimonides and for his son Rabbeinu Avraham, and for those of us who consider ourselves students of this school of thought, is we're fiercely monotheistic. It's a radical monotheism. So if you're a monotheist and you believe that God therefore has no physical presence, what the philosophers call a body, how do you contact the divine? How do you engage with the divine? It's like the ultimate black hole, the ultimate Teflon. And so in fact, I actually want to start with a short selection from The Wars of the Lord, written to the sages of Provence, where they were still having problems with those who believed that God had a body, had a physical form. And we'll see later when we do a short history of what later became called the Kabbalah, that they have to face that very issue. So he writes the following: "You, people of God and his heritage, know that God made humans different from animals because of the reason, wisdom, and understanding that he endowed them. Also, he made Israel different by giving them the Torah and the commandments. Therefore, reason came before the Torah, both in the history of the world and in the people that live in it. Reason has been given to mankind since creation. The exalted and extolled one, the Arabic is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is exactly what the Muslims call God, cannot be seen by the eye or understood by his creatures through physical senses, because they can only comprehend bodies. Word has come to us and to our forefathers, namely his father, that many people overseas who live on the islands and far corners of the earth err in this fundamental principle. They interpret these scriptural verses and allegorical passages literally. He had the same problem that his dad did, that they misread the Bible, they misread the teachings of our sages. For this, our heart is faint, and for these things our eyes are dim. And our forefathers were alarmed. How can such impurity occur in Israel? It is like the impurity of idolatry, of people who serve idols, who deny the Torah and serve other gods beside him. A person who introspects will realize the insanity of thinking that the Creator is corporeal, or that he is a likeness or a specific place, because such insanity only comes from a person who does not know him. And he who does not know him denies the real him, the real God. His service and her prayers are not directed to the Creator of the world, the God of heaven and earth. Such a person does not serve God, but only his own shadow, like those who serve demons. As our Talmudic sages said, they serve their own shadows. That entity that they perceive as corporeal, as having a body, with a height and with a specific place where he sits upon a throne, does not exist at all. It is regarding such fools and others like them that the prophet says, he has shut their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot understand. The news was spread in our country that the works of my father, the Guide of the Perplexed, and the Book of Knowledge from his halachic corpus, Mishneh Torah, were burned by one faction of the people in Montpellier through the power of the Christian authorities who assisted them, because these books dispute their faith and reveal the falsehood of their viewpoint. They were undoubtedly assisted by the Christians because their belief is not so distant from theirs. That bears repeating. They were undoubtedly assisted by the Christians because their belief is not so different from theirs. No Israelite who lives from the easternmost corner to the westernmost corner of the land of the Ishmaelites is in doubt about this matter. Even the Ishmaelites accepted this faith from the Israelites and built the fundamental principles of their religion upon it. They repented from the folly of their ancestors who used to worship idols and erred in the unity of his name and his greatness. As it is written, nations shall come to you from the ends of the earth, and they shall say, surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanities, and harmful concepts. The same was said to one of the prophets, from the rising of the sun unto the place where it goes down, is my name great amongst the nations. Their service is to truly believe in the unity of God's name, as it is written, and in every place incense is burned and offerings are made to my name, and a pure offering. He who disagrees and says that the Creator, may he be exalted and praised, has a likeness or a bodily form, or that he is located in space, denies the truth about his Creator by attributing form to him. Therefore, he is a heretic and has no portion in the world to come. To my students, you thought I was hard-ass? Where do you think I got it from? Okay, so with this in mind, he's rejected pantheism, the notion that the universe is God, and panentheism, that the universe is part of God, or that God is in everything, in favor of, I have here my notes, strict monotheism. I would say radically strict monotheism. So how do you encounter a God who is absolutely transcendent and only metaphorically immanent? So if you're going to go hunting for that mystical experience, where would you look? You might start with the religion closest to yours, your next door neighbors, namely the Muslims, which is in fact exactly what I would initially say he did, what I would say they did. They looked to Islam, and particularly for Rabbeinu Abraham, extending his father's work, they brought Sufi mysticism, he would argue, back into Judaism. So at this point, it's worth a 2-minute explanation of what the word Sufi means. The actual word in Arabic has a direct correlation in Hebrew. The name in Hebrew is Hasid, pious ones. The same way we have today the Mitnagdim and the Hasidim, same thing in Islam, except that they have armies and they kill each other over the metaphor. But that's another story. But so Sufi simply today means Islamic mysticism. And so to say that Rabbeinu Avraham practiced Islamic mysticism, yeah, that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what he said he was doing. He was unashamed about it. And if he was some ordinary Joe Jewish heretic, that would be one thing, except he's the Rais al-Ummah. He's the head of the Jewish community, the son of the greatest thinker in 1,000 years. And so he took flack from it, not actually so much from abroad, but from within the Jewish community of Cairo, as we'll see. So now what do we do with what he did? So let's see. The first thing, I'm sorry, lost track. He extends what his father did. Again, his father had said you should engage in politics, people, or mysticism, God. And of course, much of Maimonides' philosophical teachings, particularly the absolute unity of God, Tawhid, is what we call Yihud Hashem, the unity of God. And it shows Islamic influence because, of course, they're the same thing. And if you read Maimonides' halachic guide on how to do Jewish prayer, it physically looks a whole lot like Islamic prayer. For example, washing both one's hands and one's feet before prayer, and requiring prostration, al-sajada. We'll come back to that. Okay. How are we doing? Behind schedule. Perfect. Okay, so now let's begin to explore how Rabbeinu Avraham, taking the Sufi teachings of his era, of his moment, teaches us how to have something that we today would call the mystical, or even better, the prophetic experience. So I want to start with a teaching from Chacham Hosei Faur, one of the preeminent Sephardic teachers of the 20th and 21st century, tragically passed away this past year. And I had the pleasure of hearing him say these words with my own ears. So this isn't I heard it said in his name, I actually heard him say this. Maimonides the father, Moses, understands that there are 3 levels of human development, both for the individual and for the collective, the species. They are the mythic. You start with storytelling. We find this in the Hebrew Bible, and we find this in the writings of the sages, in the 2 Talmuds and in the Midrashim. That's early stage. Then you advance to the next level, which is the rational, a scientific understanding of the world as it is. You no longer believe in the tooth fairy. In Judaism, we see this expressed primarily in the legal aspects of the faith, which has always been subject to critical, logical scrutiny, most highly developed in the Talmuds, and one could argue in Maimonides' own work. When I was in yeshiva, one of my friends jokingly said that the Talmud is the ultimate commentary on Maimonides. I now realize in some sense he wasn't joking. The third level, after you've pursued rationality to its limit, you've pushed it, is the mystical. Where rationality ends, mystery begins. And so, of course, today that boundary between the two has changed. So, for example, you can't see this well given my camera, but Chacham Faur did a demonstration of this, that before Newton, this was a mystery. Why do things fall down as opposed to saying suspended or falling up? Nobody knew. After Newton, they knew that it happens. By the way, as to why it happens, Newton writes in his magnum opus Principia Mathematica, I leave this as an exercise for the reader. In other words, he had no idea why gravity actually worked. That had to wait till Einstein. But he set the problem up right, and he got the math right, at least at the level that human beings normally work at. So the point is, that used to be mystery. Now that's rationality. And in a modern industrial world, the realm of the mystery has now diminished dramatically. But there's still room for it, as we'll see, inshallah. So what do you do to get to what Maimonides, what Rabbeinu Avraham calls pegi'ah, encounter with the divine? It's the same notion that his father had in terms of reaching the boundary of the mystical. It's preparation. It's like everything else, and it's like everything culinary. It's all in the prep. It's all in the mise en place. So you are, as it were, climbing a ladder. And that metaphor itself was borrowed from the Sufi mystics, who arguably borrowed it from us with the story of Jacob and the angels ascending and descending the ladder. So how do you climb this ladder? And here, Rabbeinu Avraham has a really interesting idea, and that is the Torah itself, the Torah and its mitzvot, and with particular focus on the interpersonal ones. Judaism has classically divided the mitzvot into two categories: those that are ben adam lachavero, between people, and ben adam lamakom, between human beings and God. So it's particularly the interpersonal ones, not the ritual, but the interpersonal mitzvot, because that's how you cultivate a sense of compassion for God's creatures. You develop your personality as a compassionate person, and that is a preparation, and he actually makes it an absolute prerequisite to the mystical experience. As I have in my notes here, you can't be a Jewish mystic and a jerk at the same time, which is why my wife would probably disqualify me from being a Jewish mystic, but that's another story. And at this point, I actually want to tell you a teaching of one of my teachers, Rabbi Chaim Ovadia, who wrote that God gave us the commandments between God and man, in other words, ritual, to train us, to prepare us for the hard work, namely the commandments between people. But that's much harder. To love God, that's in some ways easy. To love the guy who's being nasty to you, that's tough. Okay. So part of what this process does of observing the commandments and of learning the commandments, its development of the character and development of the mind, is it trains you to understand the mitzvot at a higher level. The how you do the mitzvot can stay pretty static over time. And interestingly enough, Maimonides is actually rather lenient on many matters of Jewish law, as is his son, Rabbeinu Avraham. But it's the meaning, the understanding you have as you do them. You get a deeper experience of the mitzvot. You get the deeper meaning of it, the why behind it, and that enhances your experience of actually doing it. This can sometimes lead to pious stringency for certain people. I had a teacher, for example, who would eat meat, but only at sacred meals. He would only eat meat on Shabbat, on holidays, at a wedding, a bar mitzvah, to form his character, to show compassion to animals. And so what I would say, and this is me speaking now, in small doses with a sense of moderation, this can be a tool to growth, which, as we will see, is actually an essential part of the training. And in fact, Rabbeinu Avraham says that there are certain areas you should be strict, but not too strict. Again, it's everything in the balance. So now we're going to get to the meat and potatoes of the tarika of Rabbeinu Avraham, the path that he established. And it is not surprisingly exactly out of the Sufi mystical tradition. Here's the path. You start with sincerity, purity of actions. From there, you go to mercy, kindness. From there, you go to generosity. From there, you go to gentleness, patience. From there, you go to humility. From there, you go to faith. It's interesting that faith is not the first step. It's actually a step along the road. From faith, you go to contentedness. From contentedness, you go to abstinence. From abstinence, and this is a very short part, you go to mortification. From mortification, you go to conquest of desire, which is not exactly the same thing as contentedness. It's conquering the desire. And then you're ready for what he calls solitude, or what I would call meditation or prophecy, the mystical experience. He doesn't give, here's what to do. Do this, don't do that. Because there's no way he can know what you need to achieve all of these. This is the difficulty of learning mystical practices in general, in Judaism in particular. I used to joke, those who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know. And because I'm talking, that tells you that I don't know, and I am the first to admit it. I don't have a teacher in this. I can't say my teacher taught me this. And even if I had, what he or she taught me might not help you. So this is the rough outline, because this is all we have. It's still pretty heady stuff. And there's enough here to keep you busy for, I don't know, a lifetime. So his most overtly Sufi practices were in prayer. Because of course, well, not of course, for Maimonides and for Rabbeinu Avraham, the place where you most, as it were, contact the divine is in study and in prayer. Study is worship of God with your mind, and prayer, the way most people think of it, is worship of God with the emotions. He actually, taking a page from the Sufi, says it's worshiping God with everything else, in particular your body. So he transformed the practice of synagogue, the synagogue in particular, his synagogue in Cairo, and these notions spread through North Africa and to Yemen. I still remember the first time I went to a Yemenite synagogue in Israel, and I walk in, and there are a few chairs along the side for the old people, but there are prayer mats. And I'm like, okay, this kind of looks like a masjid. And that was the point. So today we kind of take it for granted in modern synagogues, you sit in rows, but he actually had that as a reform of prayer, that you should sit in rows the way the Muslims do, shoulder to shoulder. And that you should adopt certain posture. And they include, let's see, sitting cross-legged. There's one tashahud, which I don't know what the English for. It's sitting on the knees. It's not kneeling. You're sitting on your buttocks, but your knees forward. I don't know what the word for that is, but there's a word for it. Somebody will tell me. The next is qiyam, which is standing. In particular, I don't know if, hang on, I can, holding the hands this way. Oh, I'll stand up and do this way. Over the heart, hand over hand. And to this, we actually have an external witness text that they did this. Because there's a Shiite hadith that Aisha, one of the wives of Muhammad, hated to see her Muslims pray this way. And the idea of the author of this, the Shi, okay? She hated to see Muslims praying with their hands across their chest as opposed to side by side, which is the way they do it in Iran in particular. It's how the Shi'i do it. Because that's how the Jews do it. In other words, we know from the Muslims how the Jews prayed. Okay? Then there's what in Arabic is called ruku, which is bowing, 90-degree angle. In Hebrew, it's called qidah. Then there's al-sajada, or the sujud position, which is face on the ground, 7 points of contact. So your feet, your knees, your hands, your forehead on the ground. And Jews do this. Muslims do it too, but guess what? You go to a Yemenite synagogue and that's how they pray. When the chief rabbi of Israel, the Rishon LeZion, went to the United Arab Emirates, he brought along with him Chacham Arusi, the head of the Yemenite community, and there's a beautiful photograph of him in the synagogue in Abu Dhabi in full prostrate position, wearing talit and tefillin. And then, of course, there's full hishtahhavaya, full prostration, which most Ashkenazic Jews today only do on Yom Kippur. And even there, it's often just the rabbi and the cantor doing it. So what's the purpose of this? Why does this matter? Why would you do this? So it's 3 purposes. And this gets to, how does this help us? It's for the glorification of God's name. That somehow bowing glorifies God's name. And that's universal to every religion we've seen. For acknowledging his goodness and giving thanks for it. Normally, you don't think of prostration as a thanksgiving pose. But remember, he's writing, the name of the book he's writing this in is The Sufficiency for the Servants of the Lord, Kitab Kifaya al-Abedin, the servants. And servitude here does not mean slavery. It doesn't mean it at all. It means that this is a God you serve from love and from a position of thanksgiving. And then the third is for supplication for God's mercy, which we are always in need of. And at this moment, I don't have to say anything more on it. I am in the unfortunate position of now having lost a second student to COVID in the past year. And there are no words. So let me go back to the notion of prostration. Sorry, there was a 4th one, my apologies. Prostration as an expression of humility. And so this gets back to what Nancy, you picked up on earlier, that if you want to have God in, you have to have some of you out. And the Kabbalists speak of diminishing the ego, bitul hayesh, in order to allow place for God, as it were, to enter. So he writes the following. They bow down to the ground and prostrate in Kaddish and Kedusha. And many of them bow to the ground whenever they feel overcome with humility and great focus, with kavanah. So too, they prostrate instead of bowing from the waist at the beginning and the end of the Avot blessing in the standing prayer and the Modim blessing, where normally today we just do a ruku, a qidah, they would do a full sujud. Likewise, they might prostrate at certain moments, even in Zmirot, in the introductory prayers and the blessings of Shema, and at other places of the main prayer. In short, they view their bowings and prostrations as a sign of concentration, again, of kavanah. So this is a technique that can help you focus your prayer. Now, of course, the problem is if you do this in public in most synagogues, they're going to wonder if you're in the wrong place. They're going to think you're becoming a spectacle, that it's look at me, look at me. So it's look how humble I am. So that's a problem. So part of me says we need to work on communities to see about making it so that that's not a problem. But certainly in the privacy of your home, where nobody's going to think that because nobody's going to be there. Yeah. And then finally, and again, I'm sorry I used the word finally. I may have misled you on that. My apologies. He speaks about a practice, again from the Sufis, called in Arabic dhikr, related to the Hebrew word zecher, or hazkara, the remembrance of God. And he doesn't talk about the particulars of it. but Sufi mystical meditative practices to simply remember the names of God, to remember God. These are non-obligatory Sufi mystical practices involving reciting for Muslims the 99, for Judaism the 7 names of God. And I started us out with a song version by a modern Sufi mystic, beautiful song in its own right. There are beautiful Sufi mystical traditions, for example, that when we say that human beings are created in the divine image, that you should see when you see another human being, and they superimpose the name Allah, God. So ancient Jewish meditative practice to see Yud He Vav He, where you're seeing a human being. Even more to the point as you get deeper into this, one of the Sufi mystical songs is simply to sing or say who, him who has no name, him who has no place. So what do? So we study, we worship using the intellect, we pray, we worship with the soul, and arguably with the body, and in our relations with other people, learning to perceive the divine image in every person. Greater observance of the mitzvot, particularly those involving other people, the interpersonal mitzvot, with a greater understanding of their purpose, the meaning behind them, begins the process of perfecting the human person. The next step is re-engaging in Jewish prayer, first person singular and first person plural, active, focused prayer. And if I can quote my wife quoting Joel Grishaver, Jewish worship is not a spectator sport. It's an audience participation game. And finally, re-engaging with the broader community with greater kindness and compassion. And that's all I have for you tonight. And I'm actually finishing early. My students are going, that never happens, but here we are. Thank you all for being here. You're muted, Nancy.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Yay.
Yay.
That was beautiful. And compassion, humility, those are things in great. It's such an interesting thing, the timeliness of what you're talking about. If ever there were a need, and we see such brutality and just such hatred, and yet to find that compassion for another human being, even to recognize that someone else you're looking at is suffering, or which has to be a hell of a lot of suffering to do things people do.
Yeah.
But let me, before I get to that, let me ask some questions in particular for you. The first one, and just so much to think of it, this just endures these thoughts and this recipe. A question to be answered. In Genesis 3:5, Elohim is used twice. The first use of Elohim refers to God, but the second one refers to angels, in quotes, in my studies. But all the English translations say God in both uses of Elohim. What do you say? And this is from Michael.
I don't have a Tanakh in front of me at the moment, so I can't answer in any sense, authoritatively or non-authoritatively. Yeah, I don't know. Sure, fetch me one, please. Thank you.
That is a very wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Second question from Michael. Reference
right hand over the left from Sandra.
3:5. For God, Elohim, knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, in quotes, Elohim, knowing good and evil. Do you have anything to say to that?
No idea. What I will say about the early parts of Genesis, particularly Genesis 1, is if you want to understand the physicality of how God created the universe, you ought to pull open a physics textbook and read about physics. I don't know what Genesis 1 is talking about. I do know what it's not talking about.
Mm.
The reason I say this is on our way to Cincinnati, we passed by the Creation Museum, which is unworthy of response. It's beneath my dignity to rebut it. It's silly. I mean, by the way, so Rabbeinu Avraham had to face that issue then. We have to face it now in terms of literalism.
Yeah.
When you take a text too literally, you miss the whole point of the text.
Right.
You've erred at multiple levels. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and yeah, I'm not sure we're going to end up needing it. Thank you in any case. Perfect. Thank you.
You've spoken about compassion and kindness as teachings from Rabbi Abraham Maimonides.
Yeah.
Yet, where in our scripture do direct examples or direct portions in our scripture talk about this as ways to heighten our divinity?
Not to heighten our relationship with
God. We are not, sorry.
Yeah, for sure. That's, again, Maimonides, Rabbeinu Avraham are not panentheists in the slightest.
Right.
There's you, there's the universe, there's God.
Yep.
They are not the same thing.
Yep.
They are. This isn't. I mean, you can argue that Spinoza runs with it the same way the Zohar runs with it in a different direction. The Safavid mystics, the Hasidim, but this is not where we're at in terms of this type of mysticism. That's part of the problem they face, is because you can't draw the tree of life. You can't draw a physical body and say that's kind of what God looks like. God has a crown on his head. God doesn't have a head. So how do you encounter something that you can't grasp with your mind, with your body at all? And by the way, for those of you who are students of the Kabbalah acknowledges this too. When it says, Leth machshavat tfisa bach klal, no intellect grabs hold of you at all. In other words, if you think you understand God, all we can say with certainty is that you do not understand God. That's absolutely certain. As to anything else, all bets are off.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah.
So Abraham Maimonides integrated Sufi mystical practices into his teachings. Where did it go from there? Where did it evolve from there? And what are we seeing in those, other than in the positions and things like that of prayer? Has it been picked up? Did it get integrated into Kabbalah?
So there are many students of Kabbalah who would say that it did, although that position itself was considered politically incorrect. Gershom Scholem and Moshe Idel, for example, the great scholars of the 20th century of Kabbalah, denied categorically that there was any Sufi influence on Jewish mysticism. And far be it from me as somebody who has little to no expertise in Kabbalah to say B as in B, S as in S. But if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Okay. So, we know that they had access to his texts. And I see one of the questions from my friend and colleague and fellow numismatist, Rabbi Larry Edwards, about did he engage in defense of his father's teachings? Yeah, you bet. That's why he wrote Milchamot Hashem. That's exactly. He tried initially to stay above the fray, but he recognized that wasn't going to work. And so in the first, they called them the Maimonidean Wars, the first battle of Maimonides, as it were. Yeah, he was an active participant in defending his father's views, which also tells me that he didn't stray from his father's views, because he was his father's greatest defender, both in terms of his halachic material, by and large, and his philosophical workings. He was the same way Maimonides was more flexible on halakha than a lot of people think. Abraham Maimonides wrote in one of his responsa that on a particular matter, he disagreed with his father. And had his father lived, he would have been able to convince him of the son's position, and he would have changed his ruling on it.
And that was sort of one incident. It wasn't
yeah. But he doesn't. This is a no biggie thing to disagree with the greatest scholar of Jewish law ever since Moses. Okay. Now the fact that you get to call him dad, that's kind of, that helps the matter. But he saw that the halakha could evolve, and that one's thinking could evolve on it, and that he thought he had a better argument. And had he made it, his father would have been convinced by it. Because again, that's in the realm of rationality. That's in the realm of logic. If I can show you you're wrong, you win the argument. That's how it works. So let me get back to the question. Did it have an influence on later Jewish mysticisms? Rav Kook certainly thought so. He does. Rav Kook doesn't. Rav Kook was the first chief rabbi of British Mandate Palestine, one of the great Jewish mystics of the 20th century, arguably one of the great Jewish mystics, period. He wrote about Moses the father, and I think by extension it would apply to the son, that by putting a boundary of God has no body, you can speak kiviyachol, as it were, about God having a body as a metaphor. That's what I said earlier, when that God's transcendence is absolute, whereas God's immanence, feeling God's presence, is a metaphor. Because of course, God doesn't have a physical form, a body, a place. By putting that as an absolute boundary condition, he kept the Kabbalah from becoming heretical. By it's bumpers on the side lanes.
Got it.
When we had an annoying car today going at the moment you get edged slightly out of the lane. That's exactly what Maimonides is doing, by saying that you have to always remember that God is non-corporeal. So yeah, it had a huge influence in that sense. And by the way, there were Kabbalistic commentaries written on Maimonides. It's hard, for a Maimonidean, it's hard to imagine. No less than Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak, wrote a Kabbalistic interpretation of the Guide of the Perplexed. Talk about gutsy.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay,
he did it.
We have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
Speaking of corporeal, is the right hand over the left? I mean, we get specific here on what to do, so. That's from one of the rabbinic students.
I saw from Sandra, yeah. I once made the mistake of asking the Chabad emissary in Ann Arbor what the Kabbalistic significance of being left-handed was. That's a half hour of my life I'm never going to have back again. Yeah, he actually says right hand over left. So of course, me being a left-handed person, this is my Yad Yamin. But that's another lecture. In terms of the Judaism's understanding of left-handedness. But yeah, arguably it's right hand over the left.
Another anonymous attendee asked, aren't practices like mortification in opposition to Judaism? First, tell us what mortification is.
Mortification, it's not Monty Python. Pie Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem. It's not that. Primarily for Rabbeinu Avraham, it was fasting. Okay. Because of course you're not supposed to damage the body, because the body, as it were, the soul inhabits it. It's you. It's at least a part of you. And that's why I didn't skip over it. It's there, but again, with certain that he wants you to stay balanced. The problem with some aspects of Kabbalah is that it can lead you to be unbalanced, particularly if you're not ready for it. This is why it's important, if you're going to study Kabbalah, to have a master teacher to guide you, because this is heady stuff. And, be careful. So yeah, for example, he permits for exceptional persons to fast on Shabbat, which is normally forbidden. Let's stipulate that. Because Shabbat is for oneg, is for pleasure. So yeah, the codes allow if you had a bad dream, for example, and you're farmished, as they say, and people used to believe that fasting would help fix that. So now your fasting is a form of joy on Shabbat. Okay. But yeah, by and large, modern Judaisms have frowned upon mortification of the body precisely because you need guidance for how to do it. And I don't know of one. I can't find one for me, much less for anybody else. So sorry.
One more question, but you said you're a master Kabbalist if you're going to study. So everybody out there listening and anybody interested in Kabbalah, Hebrew Seminary has a master Kabbalistic teacher, that being Rabbi Dr. Goldhammer. So please keep that in mind. You don't have to run across the world and search. You can come right here.
Yep.
Final question from Michael Erickson. I agree we are to show love and compassion and kindness and humility, but are we not first and foremost to obey God's, quote, creation orders and decrees, unquote, such as man-woman marriage, human life in the womb, etc. Oh, this is going to get tough. We only have about a minute or so. This is the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4-5.
Normally when you don't like a question, you question the question. Very Talmudic.
Yeah.
So the Talmud is very good at doing just that. Okay. The idea that God didn't command us to be kind to other people, that's part of it. That's part of the religion. Okay. As I'm fond of saying, Judaism is not conservative. Judaism is not liberal. Judaism is the attempt to get to the truth. There are late night talk show hosts who would say that the truth has a liberal bias, but we'll leave that for the talk show hosts. The truth is the truth, and the mitzvot are the mitzvot.
What a beautiful way to close. What a beautiful way to close and emphasize what you said in a couple of sentences. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really, I just remain fascinated, enamored, grateful that these teachings endure, and therein is an incredible message for all of us. So on behalf of the Hebrew Seminary, we want to thank you for joining us this evening, everybody here, and those of you who joined with the recording for this event of our spirituality series. And we're so grateful to you, Rabbi Vaisrub, knowing that the son of Moses Maimonides was an extraordinary luminary in his own right is deeply inspiring, to say the least. But to know centuries later that his practices and teachings can guide our lives right now is a testament to the enduring wisdom of our faith and the enduring blessing of those who had the gift to inscribe these teachings for posterity. As we near Passover and beyond, may each of us prepare ourselves to make space for God through compassion and humility. We're very grateful to you, Kathy, for your beautiful signing this evening. Thank you. And we hope you'll participate in the following two events of the spirituality series, the next being Tuesday, April 27th from 7 to 8, when our esteemed rabbi and executive director of Hebrew Seminary, Rabbi Sherry Chen, will speak about if ever we needed angels. We do. All of these events are recorded and we'll be sending it to you. So we'll be resending the registration for you or those you want to share it with, and we encourage you to share it. And they'll be made available for future listening. The Hebrew Seminary is on a quest to raise awareness about our school and its wealth of offerings for both rabbinic students and the community at large. Witness this. If you haven't already, please visit our website, HebrewSeminary.org to learn more about us and to explore seminary course offerings available to you. We also welcome your support of the seminary so we can continue our mission and our important work educating rabbis as Jewish leaders and spiritual guides to serve the deaf community and other communities and to serve you. We wish you all good health and peace as we enter spring, hoping that the budding leaves and flowers can spark our own spirits to blossom in this new light and season of hope as we continue to emerge from some very dark times. We look forward to seeing you soon. In the meantime, Hag Sameach, and may you have a good, sweet Passover. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Hag Sameach, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Be well.